Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very exciting edition, an armored edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be talking with author, comics creator, and dad. Recently back from a graduation, it sounds like, Michael Schwartz. Michael, thank you for jumping in, joining, and bringing a magnificent backdrop.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jason.
It's a pleasure. It is a pleasure. You sent me the first issue of Armored, and I have to tell you, you never know what you're gonna get with a book, when you're opening it the first time. And I'm open to a lot of styles and a lot of approaches, but it is a very pretty book.
Oh, thank you. Actually, that's all Ishmael, I have to say. I guess I had a hand in paying him.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, that's all him. And obviously the cover artist as well. But Ishmael, he really knocked it out of the park with this series. He
Yeah.
and with each subsequent issue, his art just gets better and better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then you have sort of a ghostly force in the book. So two things really stood out to me visually. Of course, the characters are rendered well, but that first page where you get sort of like the castle that stands out, and then anytime there's sort of that ghostly influence, those the way that he chose to portray that with sort of the ashy sort of swipe there. Very, very beautiful book.
Yeah, yeah. I remember even writing that page, being very specific. Like, it is sunset and it's a beautiful sun. Like I remember detailing it all, sending him images of castle ruins. Like, make it look like this castle ruin. Like there's trees and stuff growing out of it. Like, and then he just nailed it. He made it even
Yeah.
better than I thought.
Love it, love it. Well, for folks out there that are not familiar, I know the central premise is essentially what would happen if you found some armor that happened to be haunted, which took me back to a world history teacher that I had in high school who had like an actual helmet that everybody got to pass around and put on if you wanted to. Anything else that you'd like to say as far as the central premise of the book before we
Yeah,
run through some questions?
I think you nailed it. It's boy finds mystical suit of armor in this old tomb that he uncovers, and he presses this button, and it magically uh, forms all around his body, and it just happens to be haunted by the knight that used to wear it hundreds of years ago, and the knight has to train the boy how to use the armor. Is basically the premise. There's a bit of mystery in the series as to why does this boy get the armor. Uh, there's also a death of another child, and he's trying to find out what killed this boy, who's behind it. So yeah, readers get to follow along and try to find out who's behind all these strange happenings in this European city.
Yeah. Now, I will also mention, according to what I've read and researched, Dan Aykroyd likes the book. Is this true?
Yeah, when I had issue one, the we were getting ready to launch the Kickstarter. Clover just said, "Can you send it to anybody?" Uh, that has a name essentially, and see if they'd
Hmm.
read it and give a pull quote. And I had just worked with Dan and R.L. Stein on a movie called Zombie Town,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I sent it to Dan's assistant, just saying, "Hey, can you see if Dan would be happy to read it, or would he be okay with reading it and possibly giving me a quote?" She said, "Let me find out." I heard nothing, and weeks and weeks went on, and then eventually I just got this wonderful quote from him, and it
Nice.
turns out he
Very
read it
nice.
and liked it. Yeah, and same
Love
with
it.
Stein. I just I sent him a message on Instagram, "Hey, do you want to read this?" And he sent me his address. That was it.
Ah,
And then like 6 weeks later, I get a quote. Yeah.
love it. Well, I love the creative community that way and folks that you had these connections with that were willing to speak to the book. It took me back to the moment where I was like, wait a minute, John Goodman read Mad Love. So very, very cool. At the
Yeah.
beginning of the book, you say that comics is your favorite space for storytelling. And I'm curious about why that is. What makes comics the fave?
Well, you know, I always wanted to be a director, and I feel like somewhere along, like, okay, early in life I wanted to be a comics artist, but
Hmm.
I think somewhere in high school I realized I just didn't feel like I had the talent for it. And I started pursuing directing. And again, through my career, I learned that I liked storytelling.
Hmm.
And I think directing, while I would love to do it at some point in film, I find it a bit intimidating. And then as I started writing Armored, I realized how much directing goes in, because when you write a screenplay for a movie, there's a lot left out. Like I don't describe the room a character walks in. I don't describe camera angles. I don't describe a lot of that. If it relates to the story, I will, but
Hmm.
otherwise I don't. It's a lot of like interior bedroom. It's decorated like a kid's room, and then dialogue or whatever needs to be in the script to convey the story. For comics, you have to describe every panel. You have to plan the page turns, the reveals, like everything has to be
Hmm.
planned down to like very precisely. Obviously, Ishmael, as we've gotten to work with each other, he started like, oh, like he'll determine, oh, this actually only needs two panels, and I trust him completely to run with it. But with the script, it's a lot more detailed, and I feel like I kind of like that a bit more. I like explaining the detail, the close-ups,
Hmm. Hmm.
I want a full page splash. I just feel like there's a bit more control in the storytelling. And so that's where I've come to love writing for comics, and I would love to continue it. Like I do have another series I'm working on right now, that's also independent, and I am self-financing it as well and co-writing it with my wife actually.
Nice,
But
nice.
I'd love to continue into to write more comics. Hopefully, for maybe some of the other independents, or one could dream one of the big two publishers.
As it should be, as it should
Yeah,
be. Yeah. Sending the good vibes for that, definitely.
thank you.
And of course, I want to focus on Armored, but toward the end, if you
Yeah,
want to say anything about this new idea that you're working on, you're of
yeah,
course it's an open space.
absolutely.
Um, so I'm curious what it's been like to sort of break open this process, sort of conceive of a comic and then launch it, because it looks like the first issue was quite successful, and we have a second on the way.
Yeah, I would say the first issue has been successful, for an independent comic, for
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm.
Like you never I don't know if even Clover knew like what the book would do as far as sales. They always print a lot extra for Diamond in case there's, extra orders or whatever. And we ended up selling out at Diamond. Sorry, what was your question again? I feel like I
No, you're fine. I
yeah.
was, it was kind of a what was it like a
Oh,
question
yes.
of to conceive of it and then launch it.
Yeah. Conceiving the book was interesting because I always wanted to tell a story it, like in comics. I wanted to come up with the right story that worked in comics. And this idea I had kicking around in my head for a while, and it just felt like right. Like it had that like bit of super heroics to it, but it also had a mystery to it. It had some horror elements to it, and it just felt right for the medium.
Hmm.
But again, I didn't know how to write for comics. Like I didn't know what a script looked like. I had written so many movies, but I hadn't written a comic script before. So I went and like, I had these absolute editions, and I was looking at the scripts that they put in the back, like that Jeff Johns had written or Tom King had written. And I
Hmm.
kind of picked what I liked about their formatting, and then what I did was I actually went and read I took every first issue that Jeff Johns had written and created a chart to understand his structure and
Ah.
how he paced his books. And I wouldn't say I copied, but I definitely think I absorbed of what he had done and other creators had done. Like I was reading some Tinian at the time, I think that's how you say it, or Tinian
Hmm.
books and Tom King books, and I was like, I'm just gonna kind of see what they do as far as structure and utilize that to some degree. And that's how I kind of conceived of Armored and how I put it to page. And then seeing it released is a completely different beast.
Yeah, yeah.
Trying to get people to read an independent comic is really hard because I think a lot of, comics are expensive, especially on Kickstarter. It's like $10 to get one issue, and it's hard to convince people like take a chance at this. Like, and that's why I really wanted to get like some serious artists involved in the covers
Hmm.
to be like, look at these guys have read it. Maybe take a chance. At the very least, you'll love the cover art because who doesn't love a Jay Lee cover or a
I
David
was
Mack
gonna
cover?
say, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a whole process, and I've been learning throughout. Like I'm a huge comic fan. I have so many boxes of comics, like dozens and dozens of boxes of comics and thousands of them that I've read. And I was like, you know, I was doing it for myself, not just for comic fans. So I was like, this
Hmm.
has to be a perfect comic.
Love it. Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you about the band shout out question, the creative voices that have been part of it. So Jay Lee is one of those. Of
Yeah.
course, Ishmael being the artist.
Yep.
Any other collaborators, contributors that you'd like to shout out?
Yeah, I think a huge contributor to this. Well, first let me shout out my editor, Chris Stevens. He's an Eisner winning writer.
Hmm. Hmm.
Chris, really helped assemble a lot of the team. Like he really pushed for me to hire Ishmael. He was the one that put Armored in front of Nick Patera, who does the main covers for one and two. And I think someone that really took the book to a whole new level, and I would say like a pro level, was Nick Patera when he got involved and did the first cover. He was so supportive of what me and Ishmael had created. I think I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he was inspired by it. And you can see it in that first cover. I've had a lot of people tell me they didn't even know what the book was, but saw his cover and was like, "Oh, I have to grab this. It's so vibrant. It just, I don't know. There's something about it that I think resonates with a lot of people."
Hmm.
Same with Jay Lee's cover, but Nick, once he did that cover, Chris Stevens put it in front of Clover Press, who is fairly new publisher. They do a lot of art books and a lot of big graphic novels. And when Hank saw it at Clover, the publisher, he was like, "Yeah, we would like to take on this book. I just love their enthusiasm." Um, and so, Nick, I got to shout out Nick because he's been such a big supporter of the book. He does the main cover of issue two. In addition to that, one of the first artists I reached out to do a cover was Scott Collins because
Hmm.
Scott was a huge influence on me coming back into comics, or superhero comics. At the time, I was reading primarily just horror stuff. I think Spawn was the only superhero and Hellboy superhero comics I was reading at the time in the early 2000s.
Hmm.
And Scott's run on Flash with Jeff Johns brought me back to superheroes. So I was like, Scott, will you do a cover? He agreed to it. Chrissy Zullo does a cover.
Hmm.
Her artwork, I just love her covers that she's done for like DC. Who else do we have? Matthew Tarian does a lot of these portrait covers for me. He's a horror artist I really wanted to work with, and he's a local in the Toronto horror community. So I have him doing all these portrait covers. I reached out to a person that I worked with in animation named Jeff Dixon. He worked on Aladdin, Lion King, all those classic '90s movies.
Love
Uh,
it, love it.
and
Yeah.
I knew he was doing these great paintings, and I asked him to do some covers for me, and they're just awesome. Some people tell me his covers are the favorites of theirs. And then David Mack, he has been so supportive this second Kickstarter campaign, really promoting it. And I know I just can't thank him enough. Trevor Henderson does this really scary cover for issue 5, which will be our main cover. again, another huge supporter, and Becky Cloonan as well does a cover. So I'm just, through the help of Chris Stevens, assembled this like A-list cast of cover
Hmm.
artists. It's been
Hmm.
awesome. I can't thank them all enough for contributing to the book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and as I mentioned, the interior art stands up very strongly as well, and I am curious about the creative vision for Armored, and then anything else that you'd like to mention as far as stories you'd like to explore in comics.
All right. So what exactly about the creative vision? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I'm thinking like we have two issues. Are you envisioning this as like an OGN, an ongoing?
Yeah.
Ideally, where would you like to take the story? And then anything else you'd like to mention about branching out creatively?
So I was naive going into the first I would say going into the first issue, writing the first issue a bit, and assuming I could just do an ongoing series. I was like, this is an ongoing series. I told Clover, I was like, just so you know, this is going to be single issues and it's going to be an ongoing series. I had no clue the costs involved to make a comic, printing, none of that. I kind of went into it naive. Um, with that said, I did write the first arc. Like a lot of the mysteries I set up in issue one do get resolved within the first five issues. I wanted comics are expensive and I wanted
Mm,
people like I didn't want it to drag out 12 issues. Like I do love a lot of those 12 issue maxi series that like DC puts out or Marvel puts out, but it's expensive. So I was like, I want
mhm.
people to just be able to buy five issues and say, "Hey, I got a complete story here." I do I do end the story, but I also have a big cliffhanger on the final page of issue five where readers can continue this reading. We've Ishmael is currently painting issue six right now.
Oh, awesome,
So
awesome.
it is continuing on. Whether it is an ongoing or not is up in the air. It all depends on how well I think the trade sells when we eventually create a graphic it in graphic novel form. There definitely will be at least three or four more arcs, at least.
Nice,
Regardless of how well it sells, I want to tell the full story in 20 issues.
nice, nice.
Again, I would love for it to continue, but I don't know how well it'll sell. So it really is about, if there is an audience for it, I would love for it to go on like 50 issues. But at the very least, this will go on for four arcs. I have those mapped out, but I have so many stories I'd love to tell to make it like, 20 graphic novels. But, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, it speaks to your creativity that you have that many kind of like what if scenarios and where does it go, and
Yeah.
that you're kind of thinking that far ahead.
Oh, I have this one story I would love to tell where Andy gets transported back in time and he sees how the armor was created. I would love
Hmm.
to be able to tell that story. If not, I'll have to tell it in like a flashback, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anything as far as you mentioned that you're working on a project with your wife.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're branching out creatively and maybe launching a few other titles in the near future as well. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, we're my wife and I are Canadian, and it's actually she's a dual citizen, but we live in Canada, and you can't. It's hard. We've had this one story that would be a very big budgeted film, and you just can't make really big blockbuster films in Canada. And we are like, you know what, the story actually feels right in graphic novel form. So we ended up writing the script last summer together, and we hired an Italian artist named Gaia Cardinelli to
Hmm.
do it, and she is like 50 pages in on finished pages at this point. We have Farron Delgado, our letterer on Armored. He's doing the lettering for this new graphic novel as well. We don't have a publisher yet. We haven't even started shopping it around, so maybe we'll start doing that in the next few months. But it's early stages, I would say, of that. That's probably the most immediate, but I would love to work on another comic or graphic novel in some form, whether it be another independent or, working for the big two.
Yeah, yeah, lovely, lovely. I think the only question that remains is where people can go to find out more. We mentioned there's Instagram where you like to frequent, as well as X, and then I know that there's also a Kickstarter page. So anything that you'd like to mention about social media handles and such of the like.
Yeah, anyone that wants to get the first 5 issues, the full arc all at once, I recommend hitting up the Kickstarter right now. Look that up. Just go into Kickstarter and search Armored 1 to 5. So that ends June 27th. So definitely head over there, or you could find me on Instagram at Mike Schwartz Writes, or if you really want to, you can hit me up over on Twitter or X at the Mike Schwartz. And if you're like curious about the book, but you're like, I don't know, comics are expensive, I would be happy to send a PDF of the first issue just to give it a shot. I really I want people to read it, so I
Awesome.
recommend people reach out to me. I want to share it with whoever's interested.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
No, and if anyone has kids, check out No Malone on Netflix. It's a popular kids movie that I wrote. That's about it. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. I love the
Yeah.
cross promotion, and sometime if you want to come back, we'll talk at a little more length on some of those differences between writing in film and writing
Yeah,
for comics. I would love to do a second chat at some point.
absolutely. Would love to do that.
All right, all right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for the talk, and glad to talk anytime.
Thanks so much, Jason.